Alright, good morning. Roads are pretty bad. I have a long trip. 7 hours round trip, 3.5 hours each way, just about. So I'm going to be busy today, so I'm going to try to make a lot of videos today. Upload them, erase them from my phone, because I don't have the memory on my phone, because all kinds of bloatware and things are on the phone. And I found WhatsApp, that fills up the phone quickly, but I turned off the automatic downloads from WhatsApp. It became too much. I don't really like WhatsApp that much, to be honest. But Twitter is a place that I like to look a lot. I don't remember all the names of all the characters that are there, but there's interesting debate going on between the libertarian and conservative worlds there. You know, today's conservative movement, I would say, is more libertarian than today's American left. Today's American conservative movement is more libertarian than the conservative left. And the question is always with the role of government. I mean, I'm a big fan of Glenn Beck, and I don't get to listen to him that often, but I'd like to hear his take on some of these questions, because you have Austin Peterson perhaps on one side and Matt Walsh on the other side of this particular issue, but I don't see them debating as much as there's someone else, CJ, I think also his name's Peterson, I'm not sure, or CJ Anderson, I don't remember his name, a teenage boy who has amassed a very large following on Twitter. The real debate that I see there is between this CJ, again I don't remember his name, and Matt Walsh. And I figure Matt Walsh makes long videos while he's in the car, although I don't think he's usually driving, he's just sitting in the car. So I can put in my 2 cents here, which I don't know. I find this to be a very difficult issue, but then one of my, and I believe it's Min Shemaim, I believe that it's by divine providence, that one of my dear friends, neighbor of mine, who watches these videos, sent me an article which I had seen the headline to somewhere else. I wasn't eyeing into the article. I didn't really look carefully. I don't really have time, but I looked it over quickly, more than skimmed it, like really looked at it, really tried to get an understanding of it. And then there's a link to like the original study, which is even more. And I find these things to be, very well connected one to another. So that's the issue here that we're looking at. But it's a subject that I don't like to talk about very much. And that's part of the issue. I try to stay away from this issue really as much as I can, because I don't like to talk about it. I don't like to discuss this issue. I find it very uncomfortable. Mostly because I'm no saint, and who am I to be talking about this? But on the other hand, sometimes, I remember talking to someone about this issue once, and they said, well, we could grow together. We can, if you have a problem and you talk about it, and we grow together with it, and you can help other people, who grow with it as well. But again, it's a very uncomfortable subject. But I think we can all agree that we want to protect children, and that's where this subject is right now. And so the question really was about, how much should the government be restricting access to things that we shouldn't be looking at anyway? I don't have to use all the words, do I? You know what I'm talking about. And obviously the main thing is we want to restrict the access to children. We don't want 11-year-old children looking at these things. Although in this world it's common, and maybe I guess there are some people in the world who do think they should be, or else they would be more careful about this. I certainly don't want my children looking at these things. And we all hope that our children are going to be better than we were. And it's difficult because, these things were there already in my time. I mean, they'd always been around, but like the way Rabbi Weinberger talked about it is like, in the old days, he talked about, I don't think I ever watched a whole Woody Allen movie. And I'm perhaps thankful for that. Even to me, really, movies from the 70s are like quote-unquote new movies to me. I watch movies from the 40s. It used to be like I'd watch movies up until the 60s. Now, even the 50s are a little too new for me. I like 30s, 40s, and even those movies. And then the 30s, the pre-code movies, are also really not so appropriate. I don't know, we watched the other night The Mask of Fu Manchu, which was banned for a long time because it's a horribly racist movie, and very well done. But it's interesting how Boris Karloff got involved in so many movies that were considered controversial. Like not only the movies, just his horror movies that to us are very tame, but like a movie like Mask of Fu Manchu was very, very. It's a highly offensive movie. But it's entertainingly so. And then there's a movie, The House of Rothschild. I saw the beginning of it and I fell asleep, But it's another controversial film, and but the typical racial stereotypes that existed in the 1930s, they were quite curious, and you find cartoons like this also with just these awful stereotypes, and trying to understand, it's a different time. It was a different time in other ways too, and but it's I don't forget that way, old way, and I think it's worthy of study, and I don't think we have to live in a bubble where just everything has to be so pristine and pure. These purity tests. It's interesting how you have the purity tests have shifted. Whereas in a certain sense, the old ways of purity that were respected have become, subject to derision and mockery, and yet there's a new type of purity that was already there. It was always there, but it's at that time when this movie came out, the Chinese government came out against the film. I mean, it's also ridiculously inaccurate in many ways as well. But it's just, that's the big problem with a movie like that, is that, maybe audiences might see something like this and think that it was real when there's absolutely no truth to this. Who knows? Maybe there are individuals that had these ideas. Who knows? It's difficult. The story goes that the person who invented this character of Dr. Fu Manchu was, there were many books that he had written, dime novels, that I think he made something like a Shilas Cholim, we call. He inquired in the dream how he'd make his fortune, and he was shown a map of China or something like that. And that's where he came up with this to decide to make a character like this. That's neither here nor there. I really got off on a tangent there, didn't I? But this question, and going back to modern day censorship, and also the questions of free speech and censorship, and how involved should the government be, and how much is the responsibility of parents? Because Austin Peterson is basically saying if a parent is not using the tools that are available to them to protect their children, then it's the parents' fault, and we don't need the government. And they're being bad parents for allowing their children access to these things. And the real issue we have to be honest about, especially once you have children who can be aware of these types of things, what kind of example are we setting? I mean, it's a difficult thing, I'll be honest. When you have things that are useful, and they are blocked by certain places and there's nothing wrong with certain tools that we have today, and we're not talking about using for anything that's inappropriate, and yet those same forums have access to inappropriate material as well. A lot of people might not be aware of that, and a lot of people might. And I'm not going to say which forums do provide access and which ones don't. It's no, if you don't know, and I don't know, and but it's out there. There are certain, the various social media outlets that are out there. They have, some do not allow the inappropriate material. But then also there's some different levels of what's inappropriate. Things that, the world might say is appropriate, but in our community are not appropriate. Whether or not people in the community regularly partake in things like this. That's the other aspect of this issue, is that, it goes back to, I've quoted many, many times the story that Rush Limbaugh spoke about, that there was a governor somewhere in the South, I don't know, South Carolina, I believe, or one of those states in the South, and he was a devout Christian, and he was caught in an affair. And Rush Limbaugh commented on this, saying, the left is going to say, look what a hypocrite this guy is, right? But his approach, I'm not going to say this the general approach to the right, but this is Rush Limbaugh's own approach. He says it's better to have a standard and recognize that you're a human being. You don't always live up to the standards that you see as ideal, than to have no standards at all. And that's the difference between, this is not really a left or right issue, this is actually a conservative versus liberal issue. Is that, well, because, and again, the left is not really liberal. The left has their own conservatism. It's just a different standard and a different type of purity test that they have than the right-wing conservatism, and then there's right-wing and left-wing liberalism. Although today there's very little liberalism on the left, to be honest. But what it really comes down to is that, the right and left are conservative and liberal about different things. That's really what it comes down to. That's the thing that nobody really wants to say. But it's the truth. And there are a lot of people who feel that, if a teenager wants access to certain material, they perhaps should be able to, but in a safe environment. There is that type of a liberal view that, the kids are going to do this anyway. Certain parents feel, wouldn't it be better that they do it in a controlled environment and not in a dangerous environment? And I'll be honest, I feel that way perhaps with alcohol. I don't have any religious qualms against alcohol. So I would rather, in my house, I'm not, I don't want my kids to go out and be drinking with their friends, necessarily. But if the covered Shabbos to have a little bit, and then they see what it is, and there's no taboo about it, and they're not going to be abusing alcohol, because the taboo is lifted on it. The problem is, my religion teaches that, there are certain things that nobody's supposed to be looking at, and it's very difficult to me in this day and age to actually, not have a struggle with this issue because of the easy access that there is today. That's the story that Rabbi Weinberger was lamenting about 20 years ago. That how he said, there was a movie that I never seen the movie. I don't know, but he described it, and there's a lesson. There was a reason why he brought this up. Is how Woody Allen goes to the candy store, or a child form of the character that he's playing in the movie goes to the candy store wanting to purchase a magazine. I don't need to mention the name of the magazine, and and he was like all clandestine about it, trying to hide it, and like whispering to the clerk, and the clerk was like, "What?" It's like, well, I want, and then so then the clerk yells out, "The kid wants the so and so, go get the so and so for the kid," and how embarrassed he was. And today you don't have that sense of shame, you don't have that sense of that is also part of the, meaning in the old days, when people, they wanted to see something, and it was, and it was a natural, normal thing perhaps, but there was a sense of shame at least, and it was concealed, and there was a sense of morality in the sense of, I really shouldn't be doing this. And nowadays, the left wants to, introduce the idea that it's perfectly okay, and there should be no shame about it. And then they even talk about how to approach it in an ethical way, because there's so much horrible, disgusting, evil things above and beyond the very essence of what we're talking about. But how much evil is perpetrated, how much abuse is perpetrated, how many people, think they're going to be, that there's something that they're going to, monetary gain or whatever, and they wound up selling themselves for a very low price. Story of, stories like this coming out of, people who, got a lot of attention and didn't get a lot of money out of it, and the shame that's involved with that people are laughing at them about this and things, and it's it's a very difficult situation of how these things develop, and we don't want our children to be exposed to this. I mean, people who were involved in this and turned their lives around, and don't want their children to be exposed to these things, and they have shame about it. And you look back and how do you and the regret that people have after they've been involved in these things and so forth. These are complicated issues that people don't think about because they're not mindful. They just think about the here and now. What am I going to... And it's very hard to be mindful. But you have to recognize, where do things come from? That's already a level of what to talk about, these questions of ethics and morality that are above and beyond what we are dealing with, and there's always two sides to every issue, because on one side, the question of the exchange of money, and is it, if you're a religious person, you recognize money comes from God, and why are you spending money on something so disgusting? And on the other hand, there's a tremendous amount of immorality and a lack of ethics when there is no when things are found for free, and how people are, that's really also a form of abuse. And so the best way, of course, is to stay away from it altogether. But it's such a struggle that we have today. And I'm thinking that perhaps, but if we start to think about these things, it might help us overcome the addictions that so many of us have developed over the years. And I'm not saying this in a holier than thou sense, but just trying to figure out, how do we get out of this sorrow, and then I see and this pain and suffering that we find ourselves in as human beings. And the importance of having respect for other human beings made in the image of God, and the lack of respect that goes on there. These are subjects I don't like to talk about because, like I said, I'm no saint. I've fallen in these areas like most people have. But I remember the Biala Rebbe from B'nai Brak. I was talking to him in a general sense, and he said, the difference between a chassid and everybody else is not that the chassid is perfect and doesn't sin, but that the chassid at least recognizes that what he's doing is wrong. Back to what we said from Rush Limbaugh. It's better to have a standard and want to get better and want to live up to the standard than to have no standards at all. And so many people in the world have no standards or have different standards, different things, They're going to be very offended by a movie like The Mask of Fu Manchu, and not for the reasons why, and there were other problematic issues in that movie that probably I shouldn't have watched that movie for many reasons, like talk about what it means a pre-code movie. And what I might think was really problematic, much more problematic, is to the other person not as problematic as as this, this and that, people living in fantasy worlds and not being able to. All of these issues, these are big issues, but and I think when we discuss the real issues behind them, the way we and talk about mindfulness, remember where things came from. I remember that you're contributing to the problem, whatever the problem is. We're not just we're talking about things that are totally legal. And then it gets worse when it comes to things. And I work in a prison, and I work with people who, have fallen in much worse ways. And that's, the way I think Ramosha Feinstein in some of his tshuvas discussed this, and other tzaddikim have discussed this issue, is that, people become desensitized. And it's the same thing with drugs, same thing with, and they're looking for that next high until they wind up doing things that they never thought they would do. And then eventually, if an opportunity comes up to do something illegal, it doesn't come so quickly that someone will fall into that trap of doing something absolutely depraved and illegal and disgusting. It goes step by step. And how many of us can look back at our lives and say, I can't believe, how many things I said I would never do that I've done, perhaps, and and then and the guilt that comes with that, and the sorrow. These are difficult issues that we have to deal with. But back to the subject of this discussion between Matt Walsh, who believes that the government should be controlling these things, and Austin Peterson, who doesn't, and CJ, I think his name is also Peterson, but he's not related, who believes that, it's not the government's job to be, and many people have been putting in their 2 cents about this as to how much should the government be involved in these questions or not. And this goes back to what I mentioned, this article that a neighbor and a friend of mine shared with me about civilization in general. government have, and what is the legitimate role of government? And when we speak about the legitimate role of government, I hate being behind these trucks. Is this within the legitimate role of government? And perhaps it is, because essentially, when we're talking about the legitimate role of government, I can't get around. There's so many trucks, I can't get around them. The legitimate role of government is national defense, right? And we have to recognize, where are so many of these problems coming from? Is national defense actually part of what we are discussing? Are we seeing a threat to the community, to the nation, to our culture from these things? And that is the big issue, that and it's not only as far as what people are looking at, but what kind of morals the society has to say that, what the government should be involved in and not be involved in. Is there a legitimate reason for the government to be involved in marriage? Is the issue of monogamy, and is that really something is that any of the government's business? And when the culture is changing, how much does it change? What exactly happens as the culture changes? Does that mean that the society and the culture are going to collapse? And that's this article that I saw of how, when societies lose their sexual morality, they collapse. At work I was talking to one of the chaplains about, and he was talking about the general culture and what kind of an influence he feels that he has as a chaplain on the staff. And he talked about some success stories that he had influencing staff members by just teaching them simple ideas, giving them simple things to think about that had major impacts on their lives. And this chaplain's a simple man, but not so simple. He's a different religion, but he fulfills that which, like when we talk about how Rabbi Nachman talks about Madav Zayin and Pusha Yid, and the importance of pashtus, of simplicity. And this guy is as doch a pashut goy, but he's teaching ethics and morality and sexual morality to people who live in a society where all of these barriers have fallen down. And when they think about this, and especially young women that he has spoken to about these issues, and he shared with me of how they opened their eyes. He was counseling one of the staff there, and he said to her, if your no means nothing, then your yes means nothing. Just think about that. And she had to tell him after a date, like how this other worker there, they went on a date, and he was a perfect gentleman. And she attributed that because she conducted herself as a lady. And she recognized that if her no means something, then her yes will mean something. And that's a gift, and that's a beautiful thing. That when you do say yes, and he's not necessarily saying for someone outside of his church, or someone in the world that he understands, all right, that has to be with the sacraments of the church, as much as he believes that those are important, and he's very offended by. I mean, he told me he was offended by wedding ministry, and that I'm willing to do a Star Wars themed wedding where I'll dress up like Obi-Wan Kenobi. And he's like, he told me, he said, you're making fun of the sacraments. And I said, I'm not going to do it for a member of my community necessarily. But if I'm working with someone outside my community, and this is what's meaningful to them, this is what's spiritual to them in a certain sense, as I was taught in a civil sense that spirituality means whatever makes your life meaningful outside of the religious world. The people were offended when we talked about that. But I hear what he's saying. I still don't think I'm not going to change my ministry because of that. But I hear what he's saying, and how he is there. Oimed ala mishmar. He's standing to uphold and protect something that's valuable. And when I'm reading this article, and recognizing that the value is beyond this spiritual value, it's beyond this issue of whether we want to just simply speak about the spirituality of self-control and being really free and not being enslaved to your lusts, which is something that's important to a self, but to go further and recognize the value to society. I have a friend of mine who a lot of people know, Rabbi Asher Meza, and he talks about why he opposes the Noahide movement so much, and why he believes that Christians who have lost faith in Christianity, but gained faith in Torah, should become Jews and not remain Noahides. And the big reason that he says that so many people choose not to convert is because they're having too much fun. And they came from a background, this is what Rabbi Meza talks about openly. They came from a background that had a higher level of ethics and morality than the 7 laws of Noah. And what Rabbi Meza often says is the 7 laws of Noah, they come from the Iron Age, and they belong in the Iron Age, or the Bronze Age. I don't remember which one he said. He said they're Bronze Age ethics for Bronze Age people. And that our society is well far advanced that, because the influences that Christianity have had on the world, and yet we don't embrace it. We don't embrace what we're supposed to be doing. And a true Torah ethic, we should be able to overcome these things. And that there are many people who are satisfied with the 7 laws of Noah because somewhat they feel that they've gotten a level of sexual liberation because the 7 laws of Noah don't, they have a different view of what's considered adultery and what's considered. Certainly there are basics of what is considered adultery and what's not considered adultery, and they are more liberal than what's taught in the Torah. Whether we're talking about rabbinical Torah laws, which are very strict, even if they're not considered adultery, but it's considered forbidden, and it's considered a sin, and it's considered even Yahara Kval Yavor, according to the Rambam, even very simple things that people think are quite innocent, and yet the Rambam says Maimonides was the great rationalist, right? He's the hero of the moderns, right? And yet he says that what is things that are very common in modern Orthodox Jewish culture are actually Yahara Kval Yavor. They're not capital sins, but they are something that one should rather die as a martyr than if someone put a gun to your head and told you to do this, you're supposed to die as a martyr rather than do this. And yet people do certain things publicly in certain communities. Rabbi Weinberger talks about this all the time and thinks that the world would consider innocent. But by Torah standards, they're not. Even if they're rabbinical standards. Even if it's by virtue of rabbinical interpretation and so forth. Very difficult things to talk about, right? I don't like talking about this. But it's important because the thing is, society can be destroyed by too much liberalism in these areas. And liberalism in the sense of maybe not people are actually pure, but at least they have a standard and recognize that what they're doing is wrong. And how throughout the 20th century, it went from, first there was the sense of, and America was a very strong country, and there was the sense that you don't do anything before you're married. And then in the second part of the 20th century, would be, there were different views, but what became the norm, and not to say that nobody did anything before they were married in the early 20th century, but rather that it was recognized that you're not supposed to do anything before you're married, right? And then the norm came in the second part of the 20th century, certainly by the 1970s, what became the norm by good, upstanding, moral people was that before you're married, you can do things with the person that you're intending to marry, right? Because you're going to marry that person anyway. And the ill effect that had on society and on marriage and on people's lives. How many people that they lived like that for a while and then got married, thinking that they want to see, is the marriage going to work before they just make that commitment of marriage, and they recognize that actually things after they made the commitment of marriage were not as good as they were before. And I know Rabbi Twersky talks about this. He says if a couple wants to see, are they really compatible before marriage? Instead of sharing a bedroom, they should be sharing a bank account. You know, and like Rav Amnon Yitzchak said, is the bedroom stuff. It's not going to be that different one to another. You know, that people are thinking that. And the thing is that if you really love the other person, you adjust to what the other person wants. You don't care so much about your own benefits. You care about what can you give to the other person, and if the other person doesn't want anything, you deal with that also. You know, and you're honest and open about these things. But the marriage could work like that. You know, you can have a good, stable marriage, and even though that's an important part of marriage, but even if it's very rare in a marriage, as often it winds up being, it doesn't hurt the marriage, as a lot of people will imagine. You know, there's so many people, and the whole marriage is going to fall apart about that. If you're really committed to this person, and you know that they're your soulmate, it doesn't matter. You know, you can live without a lot of these things, or with only sparing amounts. You know, and recognize that you know certain things are not as you know you can manage. You know, and there are different approaches and different ways of people living, and everybody has their own way. And these things are difficult. All right, 46 minutes or 47 minutes. I want to put it to my GPS where I'm going. So we're gonna have to stop here. These are difficult issues to talk about. But when you recognize that society depends on this, so our own personal selfishness, which is something we have to deal with and recognize and live with, will say the government has to stay out of this. You know, that's going to be the real reason why we don't want the government to get involved in these things, because of our own personal selfishness. I mean, maybe yes, maybe no. You know, I mean, I'll tell you, we'll talk about a different subject. I have no interest in marijuana. I've never tried it. It was offered to me once, and I declined. And I have no interest in it. It's not for me. I'm not curious about it, right? And I've seen people who really their lives are not that positive because of it. And other people, their lives are maybe more positive, maybe for medical reasons. But as far as I'm concerned, and the thing is, I've seen people's lives ruined by alcohol also. And other people, their lives are not ruined by it. And I enjoy alcohol. I try not to use it that much. I've been trying, even not every Shabbos. Depends, you know, to have a little bit more than the Kiddush. It depends how I'm feeling. It depends on a lot of issues. And I save it for special occasions. But these are questions, you know. But I feel government should not be regulating. It should not be banning marijuana, but I do think it should be regulated. I don't think children should be smoking marijuana. I think perhaps unless, you know, again, if you have someone who has a terminal illness, a little kid who's dying of cancer, it's a different story. But I'm talking, you know, but now they have the CBD that you don't get high from and all these things. But, you know, that is legal. But yeah, I think maybe even age of 25 maybe should be the legal age that someone, and usually by that time, I'm thinking if someone hadn't tried it before, then they're really not that interested in it. I certainly think the government should be discouraging its use, but I don't think people should be locked up in jail for using marijuana, or even for selling marijuana. But if you want to regulate it, you want to have it in a regulated way. I don't know. I'm not interested in it, but I don't think the government should be banning it, but I think the government should be regulating it. And it's probably going to be the same issue that I feel with this particular issue. Is that yes, the government should be regulating these other issues that we were talking about without banning them, and leave it up to adults. But the thing is really, someone asked, a particular thing that's illegal, and how ridiculous it is that as long as the camera's there, then it's legal, which is pretty much what it is. But the thing is again, from the libertarian standpoint, I think certain things should be regulated, but maybe not illegal. And I think a pious person should avoid them. But do we need the government getting involved? And the issue that's really here, though, is won't someone please think of the children? Is that you have to protect the children, but also are you giving a good example for your children? If your children see something that you're doing something, even you try to hide it, the children know. Children figure it out eventually, and then they get upset about it, and they get hurt about it. I saw this one letter on Guard Your Eyes, which is very powerful, and should, again, if we're mindful, it should help us at least have a little bit more self-control. Where a daughter is writing to her father about how disappointed she is in her father. And she said, when my friends came over, were you fantasizing about them? And I hope not. And, I think, a healthy person knows how to compartmentalize these things and not, and be able, but I remember, people making comments like that, and these things are very difficult. You have to know that, these are problems, and if I'm hoping for me talking about this and encouraging other people to be mindful, maybe I'll grow also and be able to conquer some of these things, because that's a way that we can that people are often able to come to self-control. That's how a lot of these 12-step groups are, is that you sit and you talk to someone else about it, and it helps you overcome it. All right. But the thing is this is the big mindfulness part of it is the impact that it has on society. From when it goes to being something that it was there, but people were ashamed of, and the government did try to ban it, But I think, the way the government handles alcohol is, you have to be 21. That's a smart way to deal with it, is that, well, you got to be 21. Instead of total prohibition, perhaps, but to try to protect children from at least purchasing these things on their own. I mean, I remember a friend of mine in yeshiva where he said that his father said that if you want to see something like this, you talk to me and maybe we could arrange it. And it helped. He said it helped him develop a healthy lifestyle. I don't know how healthy he was, and I don't know how healthy he is, but he has. you know, he has his own life. I don't know. But I see that ideology, but also I can't do that. You know, I do it with alcohol. I can do it with alcohol, and I can't do it with these other things. But, you know, maybe that's the other problem. We talk about these things, we start thinking about them too. You know, you tell someone, don't think about a pink elephant. That's the other problem. The best way is just to try to avoid these things. You know, it's difficult. All these things are difficult. I don't know if how we should handle this video. It's been an hour already schmoozing about this issue without naming it, but I gotta go now. But maybe now we'll make another video. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment. I'll see you all later. Take care.